From the New Arts and Media Studios in Milwaukee, I'm Charles Purcell. This is The Log. I came across an interesting essay recently from New York Times guest columnist Christopher Caldwell. Is the West becoming pagan again? About a book by a French author. Let's see, what's the name of the French author here? I'm looking at it. Chantal Delsol. I'm sure it's not pronounced that way. Please forgive me. A French political theorist wrote a book, The End of the Christian World. It's a rough translation of the French title, which I won't even try to pronounce. Anyway, interesting headline, Is the West becoming pagan again? According to this French political theorist, she does think that maybe we're in a transition time. Just as Christianity co-opted paganism, around the holidays, we always hear this. One of your social media friends, or a couple of them, who love to remind people of this, that, of course, all the rituals, all the traditions of the holidays originated in pagan rituals. Everything, just everything. The lights, the gift-giving, the Yule log, the fire, the Christmas tree, the ornaments, just all of it. And since every time they ask the question, those unaffiliated rise and traditional religions fall, to the point now where those who identify as Catholics are 21%, those who claim no belief in particular are 20%, so it's a virtual tie. The millennial generation, an interesting one to watch, which now includes most adult Americans under 40, is the first one in which Christians are a minority. So it looks like there's no turning back. We're still one of the most religious countries compared to others, in the world. But the trend is definitely going in that direction. But as this article and the book it's commenting on points out, there's religion and then there's culture. It's one thing to claim Christianity as a religion and all of its tenets. It's quite another thing to just acknowledge that Christianity, for better or worse, let's leave that aside for the moment, has left a huge impact on culture. So even though somebody like me will fight back and say, no, we don't live in a Christian nation, in a sense, we really do. We live in a heavily dominated Christian culture nation. And that is what's going through a transformation. So I never thought about it this way before, and that's why I kind of wanted to think out loud about it with you. If and when, well, let's forget the if. When this trend continues, there's no reason to think it won't, that the unaffiliated will outnumber those who claim traditional religion, especially Christianity. And the numbers bear that out. I just gave you this quite startling number about millennials. It won't necessarily mean that religion goes away. It's not like everybody's just going to become a strict Richard Dawkins atheist. And that's where paganism comes in. The authors of this article and this book are suggesting that perhaps it's a reclamation back to paganism. And not just as a religion, but as a culture. We can't have nothing, according to these thinkers. And I think they've really got me thinking. I guess I've always thought, we can have nothing. We can have no religion, too, in the words of John Lennon. But maybe that's just wishful thinking, and maybe that's not even the best way to go. Maybe a much more loosely defined catch-all paganism is in our future. And of course, the way change happens now, it can happen awfully fast. And that's a source of both fear and hope. If the change is in our favor, okay, great. If the change is not in our favor, oof. I always cite the Republican Party as a quintessential example. Talk about change. My God. It was only one generation ago I mean, one generation is pretty quick in terms of shifting cultures. It was less than a generation ago. The Republicans were just sort of standard conservatives, moderates. There were even liberal Republicans. And the shift to Reagan, and then the Tea Party, and then ultimately the Orange Menace and the deplorables. Talk about it. Talk about a cultural transition. Well, I don't want to talk about them too much. That's not what we're going to talk about today. But it is an example of how quickly things can change. On individual issues, the two I often cite, same-sex marriage and legalized cannabis. Both, my God, just within a couple of decades, within a 10, 20-year span, both of those issues just flipped from 70% or more disapproval to 70, 80, 90% approval for same-sex marriage and legal cannabis. So pretty big issues, pretty big cultural shifts can happen, and we've seen happen very quickly. And this is an interesting one to keep our eye on. And I think the authors are right to point out the difference between religion and culture. Religion is very deep-seated, and it's it's very easily interpreted in extreme contradictions. In other words, you can have the lefty do-gooder Christian who's all about the Sermon on the Mount and the book of Matthew. And then you have the hardcore conservative gun-toting Lauren Boeberts of the world, and even the insurrectionists who came in carrying Bibles and they stopped to pray in the Senate chamber that they just invaded and that we're currently occupying. All right, let's stop and have a prayer and thank Jesus. I mean, talk about your extreme differences in interpretation. That can happen on the religion side. The cultural side is a little different. That just sort of permeates. It happens over time without anybody looking. And it's not so individual. No, that one requires a crowd. That requires a whole mass of people, not necessarily making individual choices, but kind of catching a wave. So if you want to learn more about this than I do, the author again of the book is Chantal, Chantal, Del Sol, Delsol. And the book is La Fin de la Chrétienne. I can't. The End of the Christian World. Maybe I shouldn't assume there's an English translation. I hope there is, because I'm interested in this. So in the very near future, as the world continues to shift, especially the Western world, and especially for our purposes, the United States of America, as Christianity wanes, what is going to take over? And is it just going to be on the religious side, or is it going to be on the cultural side too? I don't see how we don't have a big cultural shift. Now, of course, that's what the deplorables are so frightened of. That's why they attacked the Capitol. That's why they're reacting in such an extreme, violent way. Because they see the truth. For all of my criticism of that side of the political ledger, and acknowledging their racism, their homophobia, their transphobia, their anti-Semitism, they're anti-everything because they want to maintain their position of privilege, their position of calling all the shots and making all the rules as white Christians. For everything I can say to criticize them, and I do criticize them pretty much every day, there's one thing that they absolutely have correct. They absolutely are losing their power. That they're right about. Now, I'm an older, white, straight man, raised in a Christian culture and in a Christian religion, which I let go of when I was about 12, but nonetheless, I just happen to be a straight, cis, male, white Christian who is very happy with the changes. There are many of us. Good old-fashioned progressives, good old-fashioned socialists, good old-fashioned multiculturalists. There are plenty of us out there. But there's also plenty of folks who are just damn scared of not being in control anymore. And you know what? You're right. You're not going to be in control. You're going to be one cohort among many. That's all. I personally don't understand why you're not happy with that. I don't get it myself, but that's the case. So, yeah, I wish I could, I don't know how you feel about living forever. I'd love to live for another couple, 300, 500 years. More people than not say, oh, no, I don't want to, when it's my time to go, I'd just rather go. No, I'd love to stick around. I'd love to stick around for another couple centuries and see how this turns out. I really would. And if we reclaim a sort of paganism, yeah, I'd love to be around for that. Who knows? Maybe I will. Maybe you will. I'm okay with that. I'm fine with it. Given all the alternatives of which way we can go. I mean, right now it's looking bad. If you want to use a sports analogy, it's the middle of the fourth quarter and we're behind and it's looking glum, but we still have a chance to pull this thing out. And those of us on the side of multiculturalism and inclusion and democracy and no one person and no one demographic making all the rules, those of us on this side, we want to see a win for our team. The difference is, when we win, everybody wins. As opposed to the other side, when they win, or if they win, then they're very happy to admit, yeah, we're in charge, you're not. Winners take the spoils, losers can suck it. I'm not putting words in their mouths, they're not even shy about it. And if they do win, well then, I don't know what it's going to take. Now we're talking generations of troubles. Because now we got this slow-rolling coup into fascism and into one-party rule and autocracy. We have bigotry codified into law. Yeah, I don't know what it's going to take to get out of it once we get too deep. And it's late in the fourth quarter and we're behind. We got to pull this thing out. If we don't, I don't know how we come back from that. But anyway, to button this up and get back to this book, the author says if another civilization comes to replace Christianity, it will not be a mere negation, such as atheism or nihilism. It will be a rival civilization with its own logic, or at least its own style of moralizing. When AD 384 Christians succeeded in removing the pagan altar of victory from the Roman Senate, where it had stood for almost 4 centuries, the pagan statesman Symmachus understood that Rome's tolerance would henceforth be denied to those who had built it. If we know Symmachus for one sentiment today, it is his condemnation of Christianity's dogmatic claim to truth as an affront against common sense. There cannot be only one path towards such a great mystery, he said. People find such sentiments inspiring. Regimes usually don't. A decade later, the Christian emperor Theodosius was banning the Olympics on the grounds that there was too much nudity in them, without any objections from common sense. The conventional wisdom had come around to dogmatism. It still too often does. So, closing words of this essay by Christopher Caldwell. Yeah, it's worth thinking about because we're in the midst of it right now. Something's happening. Something's happening here. What it is ain't exactly clear. There's a man with a gun over there. Anyway, yeah. Well, what else has been on my mind I could share with you? Oh, speaking of, I guess this is loosely related. Our differences, political, cultural, religious. I came upon this the other day, and you can see this every day in your social media. It's going to pop up somewhere. I saw a Twitter screenshot, and I'm not going to give the author credit. The author doesn't really matter. It's just the sentiment itself is so common. And here's how it reads. I'm confused. How can one be pro-life and pro-death penalty? Pro-life and pro-AR-15. Pro-life and anti-food assistance. Pro-life and anti-health care. Pro-life and anti-insulin. I don't get it. All right. Liberals, progressives, lefties, whatever you want to call yourself, you got to stop. This is getting you nowhere. I don't know who this is. I don't know who the audience is here. If you're preaching to the choir you're just sort of reconfirming bad logic. And I like people on my side to have good logic. I like them to make a good argument. If you're trying to convince people on the right, or so-called conservatives, or religious conservatives, or so-called pro-life conservatives, if you're trying to convince them, these arguments are incredibly weak. I know we all sort of have this fantasy in our minds that we can just run circles around people with our devastating logic and just leave them drop-jawed. Oh my God, you're right. How could I never see it this way before? This whole pro-life argument, they've got this all worked out. The difference between anti-abortion and pro-death penalty, the child in the womb is innocent. This is their logic. And you're not going to budge them from this. Whereas the convicted prisoner on death row has been convicted by a jury of his peers. The Bible itself says thou shalt not murder, not thou shalt not kill. They've got this all worked out. The translation from the original Aramaic is not thou shalt not kill, it's thou shalt not murder. It's perfectly okay to kill in the name of the state. You can kill in war. There's justified killing in war. You can't compare that to murdering innocents and putting to death by state power someone convicted of a capital offense. Perfectly within their reasoning. So all I'm saying is you're never going to convince anybody on that side. You're not even going to get close. They're going to look at this and just laugh at your ignorance. Of course I agree with you. But your argument is bad. Just let's just give up on this front. Put your energy and your effort into something that might do some good. They have all the arguments in the world for their AR-15s. They have all the arguments in the world for food assistance, any kind of assistance to the poor. They're the first ones to say, as Christians, we believe in charity and helping the poor. But nowhere in the Bible and nowhere did Jesus say that you steal from me through the state. You don't steal from me through taxes and give my money to somebody else. No, I make those decisions. Same for any social program, any social ill, health, poverty. Now, they're very happy to socialize cops and military. So their logic, they're inconsistent with their logic, to say the least. Because if that separation of my personal choice, my money, applies to poverty and hunger and health care, the state should have no business in those things. Well, then by the same logic, the state should have no business in the police, in the military. But that's where they're inconsistent, but they're never going to admit it. All I'm saying is, I love you liberals, progressives. Give up on these arguments. You're not convincing anybody. Anybody you're convincing is already with you, and the deplorables are just going to laugh at this. They have all their arguments worked out. Let's take a look at something else I saw on social media. It's such a big part of our lives. It's where ideas are bounced around, and so many of them are so awfully bad. They're such bad ideas. Here's one that really struck me. Let me read this one to you. Again, I'll leave the author anonymous. I don't need to drag their name into this. Here's how it reads. There are days when I wish phones had cords again. There was no social media. Libraries were the place to go for research. People actually talked to each other at gatherings without bobbing their heads up and down checking texts. Texts. That's a hard word to say. And media would shut the fuck up, saying the same thing over and over again, stimulating more fear, aversion, attachment, and doubt. Living off the grid is appearing more attractive than ever. Okay. So that caught my eye. And I would think a lot of people would respond pretty positively to that. They would relate to that. Yeah, I agree. Maybe what we've got here, what we've invented, what we've created isn't so great after all. The unintended consequences. Maybe I would like to live off the grid. I know it's not very realistic, but yeah, I really relate to this statement. But I feel the need to respond to this in another way. I mean, let's look at the ideas presented here. People actually talk to each other at gatherings without bobbing their heads up and down, checking texts. Well, that implies a certain addiction to these devices, and more accurately, an addiction to the apps. Well, you know they're designed that way, right? They could have been designed in just the opposite way. They could have been designed in such a way that you use them and you just immediately get off. You're happy to get off. And it would be much healthier for people. Well, why weren't they designed that way? Well, the answer is pretty obvious. Because the designers of the apps, the designers of the devices, the companies, the CEOs, of course, they make money from your addiction. They make a big old profit. So really you're not really complaining about social media. You're complaining about capitalism. You're complaining about the profit motive. That's what you're complaining about. Social media, as I've said many times, could be just the most beautiful thing in the world. Our ability to text each other at any moment with something good or important or funny is a blast. It's the greatest thing in the world. It's the addiction that's the problem, and the addiction is intentional. As I say, the exact opposite could be true. In a no-profit world, these technologies would still exist, but they would be designed in such a way that people can use them, be helped by them, and then get off of them with no fear of addiction. Because the designers, the producers, would just see to it. Because their only motivation is to be decent people. We did a whole show on this recently. You'd have to be clinically insane to intentionally hurt people. What, just for the fun of it? But no, the profit motive is there. The incentive is to make money. So then your goal is to get people on your product, on your device, and keep them there. And any consequences be damned. Same thing with the next little section here. Quote, and media would shut the fuck up saying the same thing over and over again, stimulating more fear. Yeah, that's a bad thing. Media does do that. They get on one story, they hammer it over and over. They're stimulating fear. There again. That's just a byproduct of their real end, and that is to make as much money as they can, because we live in a money-centric world. Media wouldn't do this if not for the profit motive. They'd have no reason to do it. But now they have no reason to do otherwise. They have to stay in business because it's the system we've built. Some of them will look you right in the eye. They'll look right in the camera and say, well, we don't have a choice. We have to do this. We have competition. If we want our network to be a success, and if we want to stay in business, if I want to feed my kids, well, we have to do it this way. And they're right. So this is not really a condemnation of so-called media. It's not a condemnation of our devices or apps. Let's get our target clear here. Our condemnation should be clearly aimed at money, at profit. Living off the grid is appearing more attractive than ever. Yeah, that is a great feeling to sort of be off the grid. But you know what? In a no-money world, we could just step off the grid whenever we wanted to. And when we got back on the grid, we'd be served by it, not manipulated by it, not stimulated into fear, not trapped by addiction. The problem is money. News and social media in a no-money world would be useful tools without the pitfalls. Some people try to make that claim now. Oh, I hear this all the time. Well, they're tools. Facebook is a tool. Social media is a tool. And just like any tool, it can be used for good or for ill. And they put all the responsibility on the individual, as if we all have the ability, the strength to not become addicted, to not be manipulated into fear and anxiety. This is a very popular opinion, and not just among the right-wingers. Oh, many, many left-wingers. I don't understand my fellow lefties who just don't get it. We talk about systemic problems, especially systemic racism, Well, these issues are also systemic. Imagine, okay, I'm going to assume for a minute that you're a fellow lefty. You wouldn't look at your black friend and say, you know what, just get over it. It's entirely up to you. Racism is entirely your responsibility. You can just ignore it. You can just be determined to be your own best person and just laugh it off or just ignore it. Now, you wouldn't say that to your black friend, would you? God, I hope not. You wouldn't deny the existence of institutionalized systemic racism? I hope you wouldn't. My fellow lefty. Well, by the exact same token, how can you make the argument that, well, you just need to eat healthier and get some exercise? You can do it. It's entirely up to you. Ignoring the fact that there's a multi-billion-dollar industry of agriculture and food production that processes every morsel to within an inch of its life, chalking it full of appetite enhancers and sugar and fat. And fellow lefties, let's get on board here. Let's acknowledge systemic problems, all motivated by money, by profit. The food companies want you eating more and more and more, not because they think it's funny you're getting fat. They just don't care that you're getting fat. They want you eating more and more because it makes them a couple more bucks. They put the chemical into the cookie to make you want the next cookie. They put the chemical into the chip to make you want the next chip. They put the salt and the added sugars and the added fats into everything you eat because it's satisfying and it makes you happy and it triggers the chemicals in your body and it makes you want more and more. Hundreds of billions of dollars spent on a continuing basis. Well, it's true for every social problem we have. It's definitely true for media. To get hooked on the cable shows and to get hooked on the news because you're a concerned citizen, but then all it does is manipulate you into being anxious. And they hammer the same stories over and over again. They're not so concerned about the truth as long as they get it fast and as long as they can get two people who oppose each other and keep you anxious. It's not because they get a kick out of it. It's not because they're evil villains who want you to be messed up. It's because that's what brings them profit. It's all about profit. It's all about money. The whole realm of social media, all the sites, all the apps, all the devices. So the person who wrote this post, I agree with you, but you seem to sort of miss the main point. You don't know who to blame. You wish there was no social media. No, social media would be great without the profit. The addiction to our phones, completely avoidable, 100% created by the profit motive. Living off the grid. Sure, we should all live off the grid for a day or two or a week at a time. Every day of our lives, we could step off the grid whenever we wanted to. The only reason we feel like we're tied to it is because profit seekers rule the world. So let's just aim our ire at the right villains. All right. Well, there it is. So happy that you decided to take a listen today. I love you. I'm Charles Purcell.